lecturer is, as introduced, Dr. Don Baker, professor at the University of British Columbia. Before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce Dr. Baker. Dr. Baker is a professor of Korean history in the Department of Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. He earned a PhD from the University of Washington in 1983 with a dissertation on the conflict between Confucianism and Catholicism in Korea in the late 18th century. He has published widely on Korean history, religion, and traditional science with a special focus on the life and thought of Dasan Chung Yagyong. His most recent book is Korean Spirituality, published by the University of Hawaii Press in 2008. He has also published on the history of traditional medicine in Korea, and he will be giving us a lecture with the title of Traditional Korean Medicine, Past and Present. He will discuss various periods like Goryeo, Joseon, the Japanese occupation period, and modern period as well. I believe we are in for a real treat tonight. Now please welcome Dr. Don Baker with a warm round of applause.
Thank you. I'm honored to be asked to speak before this group of distinguished ambassadors, honorable guests, and I've worked with the Academy of Korean Studies for many years, and I'm always pleased to work with them one more time. I should point out, by the way, that I've been coming to Korea since 1971. I've seen some amazing changes in Korea in those 40 plus years. Korea was not the place we see today 40 years ago. I see Brother Anthony knows what I'm talking about. Even traditional medicine didn't have quite the prestige then that it does now. And I'll talk a little bit about how it managed to gain prestige. But first we have to regain respectability and prestige. But first I'll talk a little about the background. And the first problem we have in discussing traditional medicine in Korea is, what do we call it? Okay? Okay? The official term that is preferred by the Association of Oriental Medicine Doctors in Korea, that's their English language term, is Oriental medicine, which is interesting because in North America now, Oriental is considered not an acceptable term. But nevertheless, that is the term that's become the preferred English language term for the Korean style traditional medicine. Okay? In Korean, it is called Hani, but remember I told you I've been in Korea a long time. Okay? When I first came here, Hani was often written in Chinese characters. There used to be a lot more Chinese characters on signs than you see now. And the Han in Hani was the Han for the Han Dynasty of China. In other words, it was called Chinese medicine. I'm not sure exactly when it changed, but I noticed in the late 1980s into the 90s that they use a different Han. Now it means Korean medicine. It's pronounced the same. The character is pronounced Han either way. So now it's called Korean medicine. Perhaps in English we should adjust to that, and instead of calling it Oriental medicine, Chinese medicine is called TCM, Traditional Chinese Medicine. Perhaps we should say TKM, Traditional Korean Medicine. But I will just call it Hani for the purposes of this lecture. By the way, North Korea has a whole different name for it. They call it Korea medicine in North Korea. They used to call it Eastern medicine. They changed it to Korea medicine in North Korea. They have to be different, right? So now, what is traditional medicine? You can call it Chinese style medicine. We'll see that Korea has developed their own version of this medicine over the centuries. But it is different in its basic assumptions and its modes of treatment than you find in what we who study Hani prefer to call biomedicine. We distinguish biomedicine versus traditional medicine. We think of traditional medicine in terms of herbs. There are herbal markets. You can find one in Seoul, you can find one in Daegu. I walk down the street and I feel getting healthier just smelling the medicines. But of course, it's not just herbs. Some of those medicines include some animal parts, okay, even some minerals. In fact, it's discovered that the frog skin was used for heart problems. It turns out it has a similar effect as digitalis, so it works. have to remember that Oriental medicine has had over 2,000 years of trial and error to figure out what works. So even if you have trouble understanding the theory behind it, you have to accept the fact they've learned a lot in 2,000 years. Okay. But of course, it also uses acupuncture. I thought about bringing some needles tonight to keep people awake. And by the way, a good acupuncturist, when they stick the needle in you, it should not hurt. If it hurts, you got a wrong doctor. Okay. And you know what moxibustion is? I've never tried that because it looks like it hurts. You burn a little bit of moxa on your skin. And what's amazing, in Korea, they sell self-moxibustion kits. Again, I've never tried that. It has supposed to be the same effect, basically, as sticking a needle in you, because the whole point is traditional medicine is holistic, right? If they don't want to treat individual organs in the body or individual parts of the body, the whole idea is your body is animated by qi, sometimes translated as vital energy. And when you're sick, it means the qi is not flowing the way it's supposed to flow, right? It's blocked somewhere. So you use acupuncture or moxibustion, or even prescriptions, to restore the harmonious operation of qi. It may be that one part of your body is being a little sluggish in circulating the qi, so you got to stimulate that. It may be another part of your body is being overactive, and you want to dampen it down a little bit. But the point of all of these different treatments in traditional medicine, whether it's prescriptions, which by the way are supposed to taste terrible, and they do, I promise you. But if it didn't taste terrible, it wouldn't seem like it was good for you, right? So, but the whole point of these is to stimulate your qi to get it moving harmoniously, properly. And one of the things about traditional medicine, it's not a quick fix. You'll need to go to a doctor usually several times. I mean, there are some things, some minor things. I know frozen shoulder, for example, they could often fix in one visit. But normally you need to have several visits. It takes a while for your body to be harmoniously cooperating, all the various elements in your body harmoniously working together again. So, what is interesting is in traditional medicine, they didn't have a tradition of surgery. So they really didn't care much about the actual physical organs in the body. You don't have much concern for anatomy. Now you have names for the organs in the body. There's a German scholar of traditional Chinese medicine who insists on translating those terms not as heart, but as cardiac function. Because basically they use what we use as names for physical organs as names for centers of functioning in the body. For example, the heart is the center of heat in the body. The kidneys, for some reason, are the center of managing water in the body. So you're not talking about the explicit organs, you're talking about the functions those organs play. The function is more important than the physical organ. In fact, there's even one organ that has no physical counterpart, a minor organ called the triple burner. And they've never been able to identify a triple burner in any body, but nevertheless it's very important in traditional medicine. They take it into account when they're trying to figure out which organs are cooperating with the other organs and which are not. Okay. I thought I'd just show you a little slide. Anybody been to this? This is in Seoul. You've been to this market. It's huge. And you'll see all kind of herbs there. And I'm not a practitioner of traditional medicine, so I don't know what most of those things are. Okay. And you have to know Chinese, by the way. Usually they're labeled inside in Chinese characters. And I found a painting from the Joseon dynasty. Now, I said acupuncture doesn't hurt. I was told this is acupuncture, but the person looks like they're very uncomfortable, don't they? I wonder if it's really moxibustion, or if it's a bad doctor. But this is from the Joseon dynasty. Now, traditional medicine has probably been around in Korea for at least 2,000 years. Okay? Now, how did Koreans first learn about this kind of medical practice? Well, it originated in China. There's no doubt about that. Even today, many of the books that they rely on when they're studying the theory and even the practice of traditional medicine are actually books from China. They've added some Korean books over the centuries. Now, how did this get to Korea? Well, I know this is unpopular in Korea to say this, but about 2,100 years ago, the Han Dynasty in China established an outpost in what is now Pyongyang. And it lasted about 4 centuries. It became relatively autonomous, so much so that when the Han Dynasty fell, it lasted another century. It's often written out of Korean history, but people forget there were 200,000 people in that Han Dynasty outpost. They didn't go home when it fell. They merged into the general Korean population. In fact, we know over those 4 centuries, they were intermarrying with local Korean elites. And so they obviously taught Koreans a lot of what they brought with them. Of course, they became Korean after 4 centuries. I think you can call them Korean, right? And by the way, we know they existed because they're in Chinese records and there's archaeological evidence as well. And we know they had Chinese medical text in what the city we call Nangnam, which was the Han Dynasty colony. And so from that, Koreans learned about the basic principles and practices of traditional Chinese medicine. And in fact, it was Koreans who introduced traditional Oriental medicine, Hani, to the Japanese. How do we know that? We know that from Japanese records. There are accounts of a Shilla doctor going to Japan earlier than a Shilla doctor could have done that. But the Korea reference, I think it's early 7th century, is accurate, I believe. By the way, the oldest 3 kingdoms period, meaning before the 8th century, 7th century, the oldest 3 kingdom period medical text we don't have them in Korea. We have excerpts in Japan. They're often quoted in Japanese texts, including the oldest extant Japanese medical text, which is the 9th century text. And they will quote these Korean texts and tell us that Korean text. So again, the Koreans learned Chinese-style medicine, not from the Chinese primarily. I mean, the Japanese learned Chinese-style medicine, not from the Chinese, but from the Koreans. It was Korean physicians who carried this to Japan. Okay. Now, one of the things that's interesting, though, is that in this period, there really is no separation of religious healing and secular healing. Included among the prescriptions from Korea that I found in these Japanese texts are also prayers for healing, are rituals for healing. They're all mixed together. In fact, Buddhist medicine and traditional Chinese medicine came in together. They weren't separated. You all know about this comes later, of course, Koryo period, but the famous Koryo Tripitaka, the great collection of 82,000 pages of Buddhist sutras. Well, one of those sutras is called "The Buddha Speaks on Diseases of the Eye." Okay? And there's other medical text as well in there. So, oops, going the wrong way. Okay, now it looks as though, what we can tell from the books that were used in the medical schools, even in early Korea, and we have also evidence of what books were used in Shilla, that Koreans were basically simply taking what the Chinese were producing and trying to apply it in a Korean situation. But then things changed for Korea during the Korea dynasty. The Korea dynasty was a tough time. You had these groups rising in Manchuria, cutting off Korean access to China, or cutting off easy access to China. And the Koreans, when they're reading Chinese medical manuals, they tell them, for this physical problem, you need to take this herb which comes from China. That's a problem if you can't get to China. So the Koreans began creating their own medical manuals with prescriptions based on Korean ingredients. And actually, they also found some that Chinese prescriptions tend to be very complex, because the Chinese, if you know Chinese medicine, it's not supposed to have any side effects. So they give you one herb and they give you another one to offset what might possibly be a side effect of the first one. So they get very, very complex. But Koreans sometimes came up with what they thought was, they called it first aid in the 13th century. They'd be like only 2 or 3 ingredients, all available in Korea. Mm-hmm. And I actually had the oldest medical text we have. I mean, we know names of texts produced earlier, but the oldest one we have was produced in 1245, and it was called Hangyak Kukoban, First Aid Prescriptions Using Native Ingredients. Mm-hmm. Oh, here it is, Hangyak Kukoban. It's written, of course, in classical Chinese, because Koreans didn't have their own alphabet yet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, but at this point, from what we can tell, these are collections of prescriptions. So we don't see yet Koreans developing their own take on the theory behind this medical practice. That comes later. So in the Korea dynasty, the indigenization, the Koreanization of medicine is simply in terms of the ingredients used in the prescriptions. Now, Heo-jun is probably the most famous physician in Korean history, even before the TV series about him. I like the TV. There was a novel and a TV series called Dongi Pogam. I used to joke that I was like having a TV show called Grey's Anatomy, but we did in North America because Dongi Pogam is a medical manual, which Heo-jun wrote. Now Heo-jun emerges in the early 1600s. Well, he's born in the 16th century, but becomes important as a doctor after the Japanese invasions of the late 1590s. But he represents a Joseon dynasty that is watching what's going on in China, and what's happening in China. Starting in the Song dynasty, you have some major developments in Chinese medical thought. Until that time, that was about 1,000 years ago, Song dynasty. Until that time, medical thought and medical practice were two separate streams. The doctors did what they thought would work, and others tried to theorize about it, but they didn't really work together. Starting in the Song dynasty, they began trying to have a theory that actually backed up their practice and related to their practice. But different theories arose. There was, oops, wrong way again. Okay. Don't have their names here. A fellow named Li Gao in the 12th century, 13th century, who argued that you have to focus when you're worried, trying to figure out why somebody is ill, is focus on their stomach and their spleen, and you need to strengthen those two vital organs. There was another guy named Ju Jin-hung who argued that, you know what yin and yang are? Yin is kind of passive energy and yang is strong energy. That people have, if they're sick, it's because their yin energy is weaker than it should be. It's weaker, so it gives you excessive yang. You need a balance of yin and yang, and so you need to strengthen the yin to become healthy. There were other doctors in China who said, if you're ill, it's because your body's been invaded by poisonous elements and you need to purge them. Koreans tended to prefer those medical theorists in China rather than purging, who wanted you to strengthen your internal defenses. And Korea happened to have one of the best strengthening devices, ginseng. The best ginseng in the world, of course, is Korean. So, now Heo-jun comes from this tradition. He's aware of the different schools of medical thought in China. In fact, Li's school, I think it's called the Northern School, and Zhu is the Southern School. So Heo-jun called this school the Eastern School. That's what Dongi Pogam means, a treasure of Eastern medicine. Often that's seen as Heo-jun saying Korean medicine, but Heo-jun did not see himself as a Korean doctor. I mean, he knew he was Korean, but he saw himself as a physician in a broader medical tradition. Right? Just as I think physicians of biomedicine in Korea see themselves as Koreans, but also part of a much broader medical tradition than just Korea. So Heo-jun wrote his manual not just for Koreans. He wrote it as a guide to medical practice. And it's an incredible manual. It's been translated now into English. I don't know how they did that. 9 volumes in English translation, Dongi Pogam, Treasury of Eastern Medicine. And it's an encyclopedic overview of traditional Chinese-style medicine. Nothing like it was produced in China or Japan. In fact, it was reproduced several times in Japan and a few times in China because they wanted something like that. And they could read it because it was written in classical Chinese. So all Heo-jun cared about, by the way, he wanted to keep people healthy was his first priority. If that didn't work, then restore them to health. Okay? He didn't care where he got that from, where he got the information from. From which school of Chinese medicine. He brought it together and called it a treasury of Eastern medicine. Okay? Now, oops. There he is. There's Heo-jun. Okay. Doesn't look like the TV show, but that's what we're told he looked like. Mm-hmm. And he's holding Dongi Pogam. It's even thick in classical Chinese. That's why the English translation is 9 volumes. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, So, oh yeah, he knew about the latest developments in Jin, Yuan, and Ming China. Yuan China, of course, is Mongol China. By the way, in Mongol China is when Arabic medical devices came to Korea. That's when Koreans learned distilling, by the way. Thanks to the Arabs in the Mongol times. We wouldn't have soju without the Mongol influence on China and then Korea. Okay. So there he is, Li Gao. And he knew about Songjong, but he emphasized purging, but he didn't think that was the right approach. Okay. Here's the Dongyi Bogan, by the way. One of the hundreds of pages in Dongyi Bogan. Now, it's an amazing book. First of all, I mentioned earlier, his main concern is promoting health. So unlike traditional medical manuals, which simply say, okay, you have this kind of disease, here's how you treat it, Hejun opens with a discussion of how to stay healthy. He has several pages on techniques for staying healthy. Now, some of these are, matter of fact today, exercise. Right? Eat the right kind of foods. Don't overwork yourself. But he also has some Taoistic elements. Now, Taoism never established itself as a separate religious tradition in China. I mean, in Korea. It did in China, not in Korea. But there was always influence of Taoist ideas, and among those were Taoist techniques for longevity, including certain physical exercises and breathing practices which date back to the Han Dynasty, which are supposed to enhance, again, the flow of the qi in your body. And Hejun proposed doing these exercises, waking up every morning and facing the sun and breathing in and then breathing out, but focusing on your navel. That's where the energy you breathe in has to go to be refined into a usable form of qi for your body. So that's what you have to do. They still practice that. Some people in Korea today, they call it Tanak or Tanjan Hoop. You can find it at Don World and other places, Guksundo. Okay. Now, Hejun talks about qi, as everybody has to, or qi in Chinese. What's interesting is he distinguishes three kinds of qi, which other people did, but he was very clear about how they were different. They're all qi, but one is called zheng, one is simply qi, and one is shin. And zheng is qi that is visible, such as blood. Okay. Qi that is simply qi is qi that is not visible per se, but you can feel it. For example, when you touch the pulse. Pulse taking is a major diagnostic tool in traditional medicine. They don't just count the pulse, by the way. They tell whether your pulse is deep and shallow and so on. Have like 60 different measures that they use to check your pulse. And that's the key that you can feel, but can't really say that's key because it's the blood that's going through the vein, but you can feel the key in the blood. And then Shin is interesting. Shin is the same character that means spirit. It's that key which is so fine that it's the basis of consciousness. It's still key, still a form of vital energy, but it's what allows you to be conscious, to interact with other things. And Hejun accepted the Taoist idea that you refine the key in your abdomen, actually in your navel area, as zheng, and it moves up to your chest area where some of it's further refined into qi, and then some of it moves to your head where it's further refined into shin and qi. So you got these three forms of qi. And again, he's talking about this long before he gets into any diseases. He's telling you how to stay healthy. Okay. Also, his book includes, by the way, after this introduction and a long discussion, the only English word we have for it is anatomy, but it's really more like the different functions of various parts of the body, what functions they play. Then he gets into, of course, to prescriptions, and he provides a lot of information on local ingredients. And then he gets into, of course, the acupuncture and moxibustion near the end. It's an encyclopedia of traditional medicine. One more thing that makes Dongyi Pogam different is that he actually tells you which different treatments for the same ailment are more likely to work. He evaluates them. Most traditional medical texts up until Hejun came along simply told you the prescriptions or told you the treatment. He evaluates them. Right? So he does go through, I mentioned the anatomy. The 5 major organs, by the way, which he discusses are the liver, the heart, the spleen, the lungs, and the kidneys. What's missing here? The brain. They didn't think the brain was very important. But your liver, your heart, your spleen, your lungs, and your kidney, those are the major organs. There are 6 minor organs: the gallbladder, the stomach, minor organ, large intestine, small intestine, bladder, and the triple burner, which again, you can't find a physical counterpart to the triple burner, but it's very important there. So, I would argue that it's with Hajun that you begin to see the Koreanization of Korean medical theory. Before that, obviously, as I mentioned already, you had the Koreanization of the ingredients. But Hajun puts a special emphasis on preventive medicine, and he says a good doctor should be able to if you have a good doctor, you won't get sick. He'll keep you healthy. That was his idea. So, now, he did put, another thing that made Tongyi Pogam interesting, he includes a drawing of his vision of the human body. This has been reproduced many, many times in discussions of Tongyi Pogam, because not only is it interesting to have this kind of anatomical view of the body in a traditional medicine book, but if you know Chinese and know these words, some of the organs are given traditional names from traditional Chinese medicine. Others are given names from Taoism. At the top of the head, that's a Taoist term. That's where a qi enters. Not just through your nose and your mouth, but also through the skin. He combines, again, Taoist concepts of human anatomy with traditional medical concepts of human anatomy. Both, of course, are talking about function. You don't see this kind of drawing in China. And I mentioned he wanted us to exercise. Okay? And this is an old Chinese painting from the Han Dynasty. This is the kind of thing Hajun wanted us to do. And by the way, these, we call them Taoists, but most Koreans, including Hajun, who adopted these techniques for enhancing their health, didn't think of them as Taoists. They just thought of them as techniques for enhancing your health. In fact, one of the greatest Confucians in all Korean history, Lee Tae-gye, actually wrote, copied by hand and added notes to it, a little book on the exercises like this. Walin Chimbang it's called. Recently, some Koreans took the descriptions of the movements in there and turned it into a folk dance. But again, the purpose of these exercises is to get the qi flowing. Has anybody here ever done this kind of stuff? I have. And yeah, I remember I came out the first time I did an exercise like this with Guk Sundo. And I don't drink coffee. I drink tea, but not coffee. I came out of an hour session feeling like I had like a couple of Red Bulls or something. I felt it was off. I had all kind of energy suddenly. And by the way, acupuncture. If you have a good acupuncture session, you feel tired afterwards. There must be no bad side effects. I wasn't expecting that. I drove home and I was almost falling asleep. My doctor had warned me. Okay. So. Now, what happens? I should point out, by the way, UNESCO has recognized Tongyi Pogam as a what do they call it? A global memory that all human beings should remember about Tongyi Pogam. It's not just a Korean historical treasure, but a global historical treasure, which is why the Koreans then rushed an English translation of it. They figured if it's for the world should be able to read it. I mentioned it was reprinted in China and Japan, again both because of its comprehensiveness and because of its unique approach, again, to preserving health, emphasis on preserving health. Okay. Now, we continue to see advances in theory and practice after Tongyi Pogam, which is again early 1600s. We find a very interesting book appears. Did I put the name here? Well, before Ijima. In the late 18th century, a concise little booklet on medical theory appeared called Sumin Myojan. The author of that book was King Cheongjo. A king wrote a medical manual. Why did he do that? And his father lived his father didn't live very long. His father was killed by his grandfather, if you know that story. The grandfather lived a long time. In the last 10 years of his life, the crown prince who became King Cheongjo was taking care of him. and he wrote down what he learned from that in this book. And the idea was that Tongyi Pogam is really big and thick and written in Chinese. It wasn't available for the average person. Right? So he wanted to write something the average person could have in their home and could refer to in case of medical problems. How many presidents of Korea or presidents of other countries around the world have written medical manuals on the job? He did that. Some other, I didn't put them on here, but some other changes we see. We know that in the second half of the Chosun dynasty, once Korea recovered from the Japanese and Manchu invasions, the Korean economy began recovering and actually grew to a level higher than what it had before those invasions, I'd say by 1700. And we see evidence of this in medicine. First, we begin to see the opening of I showed you the Chinese herb market. We don't find these kind of markets until the late 17th century. They begin appearing. Daegu was a major center back then. So the very fact that these markets are emerging tell us that, first of all, that the Korean people are obviously they're getting more discretionary income. They can afford now to buy these medicines. So the economy is doing well. And also we think that before the people tended to go to a shaman or a Buddhist monk when they were sick, but more and more people are turning to this more rational secular medicine. And so these medical markets appear. And along with these medical markets, we begin to see the rise of a new profession, pharmacist. Now, by pharmacist, I mean someone, you go to them and they will diagnose you. They'll say, okay, you tell them your symptoms, and they will tell you what your problem is, and then they will concoct the medication for it. Right? So they're really physicians, but we call them herbalists later. Okay? And these are not people recognized by the government as physicians. I should point out there's an official class of government physicians who pass on a government exam, but they tend to be based in Seoul. Some of them are out on the countryside to make sure no epidemics endanger the government's collection of taxes. But most of the people practicing medicine in the Chosun dynasty were not licensed by the government. But people are able to make this a profession by, say, 1700 or so, out in the countryside, by selling medicines and by treating patients. Okay. Now, not everybody could afford this, so we find Korean villages coming up with their own form of health insurance. It's called a yakke, the Korean ke, where people pool their money, and so when an emergency comes along, if you're the one having the emergency, you can take what your neighbors and you have collected, and you use that, and then later on you put money back in and somebody else can use it when they have an emergency. Well, they had that for medicine, for purchasing medicines and medical care. But again, starting in the second half of the dynasty, we see this. Okay. Ijema. In the 19th century, we find a man appearing who comes up with a radically new approach to traditional medicine in Korea. He was actually a military officer officially, but I think he worked more as a physician. And he decided that traditional medicine wasn't working as well as it should. Now, this is before the Koreans encountered modern Western medicine, which comes in at the end of the 19th century. But he's decided the reason why traditional medicine is not always as effective as it should be is people are ignoring the differences among their patients, and there are four basic differences based on four basic personality types. Remember yang and yin? Yang being the stronger, brighter force, and yin being the weaker and darker and so on. He says some people are strong yang, some people are strong yin, some people are weak yang, and some people are weak yin. And depending which one of those four they are, you have to prescribe a different medicine for the same symptoms. Individual treatment of medicine. And by the way, how do you tell what personality type someone is? By the emotion that dominates. Traditional medicine doesn't have the mind-body separation we tend to have in biomedicine. The four basic emotions are sorrow, anger, joy, and pleasure. And so you see what kind of emotion dominates a person's personality, and you will know how to treat whatever ailment they come to you for treatment for. He also says that if somebody is prone to outbursts of anger, look for damage to their liver. But if someone is too quick to indulge in sexual pleasure, they probably have, he says, a damaged lungs. I'm not sure the connection there. That's what he says. This is called for-constitution medicine. And you will see clinics around Seoul and other parts of Korea that advertise for-constitution medicine. It's based on the theory of E.J. Ma. And his medical manual has been translated into English as well. But then, before Constitution medicine had a chance to become really established in Korea and to dominate Korean medical thought, Korean medicine faced the challenge of biomedicine. Now, you heard at the beginning when I was introduced that I wrote my dissertation on the early confrontation between Catholics and Confucians in Korea. That was back starting around 1784. But Catholics didn't bring modern medicine with them. When Protestant missionaries began arriving in 1884, they came in with medicine bags. They brought in biomedicine. And of course, they thought that the only true medicine in the world was Western medicine, biomedicine. And that medicine came in, of course, as a package of modern civilization. And many modernizing Koreans accepted that. So suddenly traditional medicine, which had been the main practice of medical treatment for a couple of thousand years, loses respectability. And one of the first things the Protestant missionaries did was open up a Western medicine hospital. Now, the king still preferred traditional medicine, so he supported a traditional medicine facility in Seoul. But then in 1905, when the Japanese began the process of taking over Korea, when they made it a protectorate, they replaced the doctors in that facility with doctors trained in biomedicine. Because biomedicine was the only true form of medicine in the modern rational world, they said. Okay? So, there was a problem with ignoring 2,000 years of traditional medical practice. There weren't enough modern medical doctors in Korea. In fact, in 1910, I have some figures here, there were only 164 Koreans trained in biomedicine in 1910. Now, there were 425 Japanese and 22 foreigners. That makes a total of 611 doctors of biomedicine for a population of about 15 million. The Japanese realized that's not going to work. So what they did, they thought that they couldn't eliminate traditional medicine overnight, but they wanted to slowly replace it. So they labeled traditional medicine doctors herbalists, ignoring the fact they also practice acupuncture, matsubushin. Right? So, and the number of certified herbalists was recognized by the government. Again, they'd never been recognized before, by the way. Only those who worked for the government of the Joseon dynasty were recognized by government. But now they're being recognized by the colonial government. The number of herbalists declined from almost 6,000 in 1913 to 3,600 by 1940. And of course, the number of doctors trained in biomedicine increased from about 1,000 in 1915 to 3,600 in 1940. So about the same number of traditional doctors and biomedical doctors in Korea in 1940. Now, when Japan started attacking China, they felt the need for medical care, so they actually allowed a school of traditional medicine to open up in Korea to train doctors to serve in the military. Okay. But only produced about 300 graduates before Japan lost the war, and that didn't do any good. Okay. So now 1945, we all know Japan was sent packing, and but what you have is first the Americans come in and occupy Korea, and the Americans had no respect for traditional medicine at all. They thought it was all hocus pocus, right? And then who's the first president of the Republic of Korea? A man who spent how many years in America? Sigmund Reed didn't have any respect for traditional medicine either. So basically, it was very difficult for a traditional medical practitioner. The only respectable form of medicine was biomedicine, but there was again a problem. All the biomedical doctors wanted to be in Seoul. So people in the countryside had to go to a traditional medicine doctor most of the time if they wanted some medical care. So in 1952, finally the government, Republic of Korea, formally recognized traditional medicine as well, as on a separate track. But there were no sophisticated schools to train traditional medicine doctors at that point. It's all done, in-house. You learn from your father. Right? And as you know, Koreans really respect education. So a doctor of biomedicine who would go to Seoul National University and be trained and get an MD would be respected. A practitioner of traditional medicine who simply learned from his dad or from a respected neighbor wouldn't get the same kind of respect because he didn't have the credentials, right? It wasn't until 1965. Let's see if I have it here. Oops. 1965 that the first serious, respected school of traditional medicine opened in Korea. It's Kyunghee University. And they called it, in English, Oriental Medicine College. And if you've been to Kyunghee University, you know that, first of all, it's still the best medical school for Oriental medicine, traditional medicine in Korea. What they've done, they have also a school of biomedicine. They have both. And they have a clinic between them that's called the Clinic of East-West Medicine. And you go there, and two doctors will look at you if you come in there to be diagnosed. A doctor of traditional medicine and a doctor of biomedicine. If you have appendicitis, you go to biomedicine. If you just say general fatigue, they might send you to the traditional medicine place. They'll decide which type of medicine is better suited for your particular medical condition. Normally, traditional medicine now serves chronic ailments or slow recovery, like recovery from a stroke. So that was the beginning of respectability being regained by traditional medicine. The next year, by the way, after Kyunghee University, the second best, what's usually considered the second best school of traditional medicine opened at Wonggwang University down in Edi. I'm sorry, Iksan. It used to be called Edi. Shows how old I am. And there are now 12 schools of traditional medicine in Korea. What's interesting, until 2009, they were all private schools. The government only opened at its universities biomedical schools. But in 2009, Pusan National University opened up a school of traditional medicine. They don't call it Oriental medicine there, they call it the School of Korean Medicine. And they have a hospital to go with it of traditional medicine. The first time the government has seen fit to let a national university run a school of traditional medicine. So, you may notice, if you read Korean, all around town, there are plenty of traditional medicine hospitals. They're called Hanbang Pyeongwon. Right? They look like a Western hospital, not quite as big. They have, by the way, an emergency room. I used to wonder what that was about. Do you go in there as a doctor with an extra long needle? I don't know. It turns out if you go in there and the doctor, usually there's a doctor trained in biomedicine there, he says, you got appendicitis, go across the road, you know. But yeah, they work together, by the way, and they cooperate, the two forms of medicine. But you will find a lot of these hospitals. And there's a hospital in Seoul, Chesang Pyeongwon, that has among their doctors a guy from Austria. Right? And they're beginning to be, their research on treatment methods is being published now in biomedical journals in North America and Europe, because they work particularly to help stroke victims recover. Oriental medicine, again, they want to help you recover your strength, right? And that it helps. And of course, there are clinics all over town and all over the city now, Haniwan everywhere. Right? So if you want treatment from a traditional medical doctor, you don't have to go very far to find one. This is quite different from what it was back in the 1960s. The government's attitude towards traditional medicine has changed. For the longest time, only doctors of biomedicine were sent to the rural health centers, or the local health centers, the Pogenso. In the 1990s, they started dispatching traditional medicine doctors as well. For a while, only those trained in biomedicine could serve as doctors in the Korean military. Now, if you graduated from a recognized traditional medical school, you can serve as a doctor in the military. The national insurance system began covering some acupuncture, among other things, and some forms of traditional medicine in the 1990s. So it covers moxibustion as well. So we're seeing the government has slowly begun showing more respect for traditional medicine, but the government has been reflecting what they see in the people. The people have begun to respect it more. Let me go back. Oops. Sorry. Okay. Oops. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. Now, one of the ways that Hani has regained respectability is that it has changed the way it looks. It has modernized. If you go to a traditional medicine hospital, Hanbang Pyongwon, you might see a doctor wearing a white coat. They didn't used to do that, I promise you. Okay? They now have machines. They have CAT scan machines, but they also have machines to test your pulse. Remember, the testing the pulse is not just for how fast it's beating. It's got all these different measures. They have a printout. So they develop devices for this, modern devices. They know that people go to a hospital, they want machines. So they have that now. Some of the methods of treatment are, they still use acupuncture, but sometimes now the needles are electrified. So they send a little bit of electric current into you. And a new treatment is called herbal acupuncture. They inject a little bit of herbal medication at an acupuncture point. They also do taping, where instead of sticking you with the needle, they tape the acupuncture point to stretch the skin. That's supposed to stimulate the key as well. In the old days, if you wanted traditional medicine, you had to go to a traditional medicine pharmacy. In fact, the best thing to do is to have it made on the spot for you. You walk in and say, "This is what my doctor wants me to take," and the pharmacist would make it for you. I think you can still go to a department store in Korea and get a yaktangi to make it yourself. A yaktangi is a machine for making your own medicine. But they've learned how to standardize the prescriptions. Now, traditional medicine is not supposed to be standardized. It's supposed to be based on every person is different. And the doctor has to examine many things about you, including not only your pulse, but the look of your tongue, the sound of your voice, even how you smell, to diagnose the specifics of your particular ailment. So they can figure out which particular part of your body is malfunctioning and devise a prescription that fits you. But they know people like to go and get a pill. So now when you go to many pharmacies, what do you see? On one side, Western medicine. Another side, boxes of traditional medicine. Right? It was a major battle, by the way, on whether or not pharmacists trained in modern medicine, biomedicine, were going to be able to give people traditional medicine. I think it's finally been worked out. They solved that dispute. So what we see here is traditional medicine as Korea has modernized, so has traditional medicine. It's become a modern medicine. Now, what is its future? You know, in North America, in the United States, for example, I am from Canada, but I do know what's going on in the U.S. They have a Center for the Study of Alternative Medicines, where they've been spending a lot of money testing the effectiveness of various traditional Chinese medicine prescriptions. They found, by the way, some of them can deal with ailments that Western medicine hasn't learned to deal with yet. Such as Crohn's disease is one that Chinese and Korean medicine deal much better with than traditional Western medicine can. I don't like the term alternative medicine. That implies in place of. The way it's used in Korea is as complementary medicine. You wouldn't go to an Oriental medicine doctor only. Right? It would depend on what your ailment is. Right? I've already mentioned that if you go to a traditional medicine hospital, you might see somebody trained in biomedicine in the emergency room. Right? If you go to Kyogen University's East-West Medical Center, you'll see both kinds of doctors. So it's complementary. Western medicine is preferred for acute ailments, especially where you need surgery. Right? Traditional medicine is preferred for kind of general physical weakness or long-term recovery, such as from a stroke. And why do Koreans, why has it regained popularity, first of all, and how can it maintain its respectability? First of all, it's regained popularity. As Korea has gotten richer, Koreans have gotten more proud of their own culture. And they see this as their particular culture. They don't see it as Chinese medicine. They've changed the name of it. It's Chinese style, but it's Korean medicine. For it to advance, though, they have to refrain from what I call textbook fundamentalism. There's a tendency still in traditional medicine to read old books and see the advice they give you if you're dealing with contemporary disease. I've been to the Official Government Institute for Oriental Medicine. It's a library. There are no labs there. They read the old manuals and manuals I would only have excerpts from and try to put them back together again. At the same time as they adopt the Western approach of experimentation and confirmation and verification of treatment, they need to maintain their holistic approach to continue to treat human beings as not a collection of separate and distinct organs, but as a body in which all the organs work together and have to keep working together to maintain your health. If they do that, then I think we can see Hani maintaining its respectability for decades and possibly even centuries to come. Thank you. Thank you.